In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can proxy model the cannon. So for this part, we've got a couple different pieces. We've got some things that are shared, and they're shared down the middle. If I take the geo area and I kind of open this up and I go to the template, you can see I've made a template for the ground, for the cannon, and for the plants. And we're actually loading up this underscore O2 underscore proxy cannon, and this is what you'll be kind of using for this. If you take a look at what's in the group that was made for the cannon, what we're going to be building is all these kind of pieces that run down the middle. So we got the cannon barrel, maybe the end of this, and then the back end piece. We've also got a little bit of a handle. We've got this, what I called like the pivot for the barrel of this. We've got the axle for the front and for the back. And we've got this block that kind of goes and moves back and forward, and that controls the angle of what the cannon is going to be here. And then we also have maybe what is shared for this base. And then you can see that we've got these different kind of railings that we have here. I'm just going to select that and tap F and move it away from the image plane here. What I've built is a left side of this model like this. And you can see we've got wheels within here, and those are just some cylinders. We've got these different blocks, and we've got some different pieces that we've got here. And what this side is duplicated, and I called it side underscore left and underscore right. And you can see we've got a negative scale on X for the right side. We'll take a look at how we can do all that too. So some of the things that we're going to be taking a look at is how we can just model with just an object, and then if we go within here, and if we hit F11, we can go to faces and we can start manipulating things on a face level. And then if we do F10, we can do edges like this. And again, we can always right click and get to this stuff through that menu here. So we can do faces, edges that way, or the next thing we'll take a look at is vertex, or the hotkey for that is F9. So we'll take a look at how we can take these objects so we can manipulate them at that level and get things going that way. So the other thing that I did is I'm just giving you this file and I'm giving it to you as a template. And what we've got over here in the layers menu is if we go on here, we can turn on and off the visibility of this layer. We can also put it in this T mode, which puts it in this template mode. I'm going to hit F8 just to release some of that, and then rotate around here like this. So you can see that we can see the model in this kind of wireframe kind of mode. Now if you put it on R, that means it's in reference mode, so you can see it and it's nice and shaded. You just can't select it, so you'll never have to worry about accidentally selecting something. So again, that's in a reference mode. I think what would probably make sense is if we put this in template mode, so just go ahead and put that on T right in there. And I also put a keyframe on the time slider, so if you ever want to get this back and aligned with the image that you see here, you can do that. The other thing is if you open up the attribute editor after you select the image plane, you can see that within here, this is the location of where this thing sits for the image for this. Something else about this is just if you go to set up your project and you go to set project, if you go ahead and navigate to where the this folder sits for this, modeling for real-time systems 2, if you go ahead and select that and say set, it's probably going to tell you that like you're okay, that there's probably a default file in there. So if you select that, I should include that with the file system, so that should work for you. So if you go to open up this and go to like your workspace root for the project that we just set, if you go to learning content, if you go within there, if you go within Maya and image planes, you're going to be able to find the image that was associated with that. And so if we go to the end here, you can see it's called finished page.jpg. So if you want to load that exact image up, if that's not loading up for you, you can go ahead and find it there. So that should give you everything that you're kind of needing here to kind of model with. Now if you take a look at the view down here, you can see that X is running this direction and Z is running this direction. So this is actually the front of the model. It just doesn't match up with the reference image, so that's why everything's been kind of rotated back in this kind of direction, and tried to match the view as best as I possibly could for that. So the first thing that we're going to do getting modeling is just start in an object mode, and we're going to start modeling that way. So I'm going to maybe collapse this cannon group that you see here, and maybe we can make a new group for ourselves. We can hit just select nothing in the viewport and hit Control G, and that will give us an empty group. Or we can go to Edit, and we can go to Group like this and hit Control G. Now if there's nothing selected for that, you would need to maybe go within here. Let's go ahead and just create polygon primitives, and let's just do a cube. And then now that we've got this cube selected, we can hit Control G, or we can go to Edit and then Group, and you can see it's going to throw that into a group for us. And we'll call this like Canon _ new, something like that. Now to rearrange these things in the outliner here, you can just middle mouse drag it, and we can just middle mouse drag it into this geo area, and you can see we've started to build like kind of a hierarchy for stuff. So the first thing I want to show you is about object mode. So if we just right click on an object, you can go and you can always move between faces, verts, edges, and this object mode. If you're in object mode, you're manipulating things at an object level, so that's why it's kind of this green color. So one thing I like to do is rest my fingers on Q, W, E, and R, and that will give us access to the pick tool. We can tap W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. So all I'm going to do with this object is try to scale it down this way like this, and then tap W to move, and scale again was this R, so we're just kind of scaling it that way. And I want to scale this thing in right in through here like this. So I'm going to try to figure out like what are these numbers that I used before. I'll tap W to move this thing up into position like this, and then we'll scale this thing back down. Now if this is hard to see, we can put this on R for reference, and you can see now if we move it, we can move it into position here, and then we can scale this thing out this way. So what I'm going to do is just try to get it roughly into position, and then try to figure out maybe what are the numbers that I used here. So maybe we should do 0.6 for this. We can start making these whole numbers, and we'll just do 0.1 for this, and 1.2 for this number here. And that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to move this thing up to 25 like that. Okay, so let's just put this back into the template mode, and you can see we've taken our first object and we've set this to where it needs to be. Now if I follow the naming convention and everything that we've done before, if we open up Canon and we take a look at what we've made here, then I would just call this base, just like this. So I'm going to collapse this back up for the Canon, and we've got our first thing kind of set here. So that's us working in an object mode. Now one thing I want to show you is that we can always change our options here. So if we go to select the object, if you go over here to the channel box, you can go over to inputs, you can go to subdivision width, and we could click that and middle mouse drag the values on there. So we're just selecting that. So say I want to split going down here. Let's say I want to split going down the depth. I can select that name and then just middle mouse drag left or right, and so maybe I've got something like that. And then if I want subdivisions through the height, I could do that as well for that. But let's put this down to 1, and I'll put this to 2. So you can always go back through and change these values. Now if you want to delete the history on this, it's got history on there, so that's why you're interactively able to change the values on some of this stuff. And you see that I've got a scale set on here, and I've got a translation. If we want to zero all this stuff out, and if we want to get rid of that, so there's two things that you can do for this. To delete the history, you're going to go to Edit, and you're going to do Delete by Type, and you'll do History. Please note that you can see that in the menu, there's going to be things in here that have hotkeys associated with it. So it's always a good idea to learn the hotkeys. That way it'll help speed up your workflow and everything that you're kind of doing, and it'll make you faster as an artist. So just try to pay attention to the hotkeys, use them, and you can see this one should be something you use quite a bit, Alt-Shift-D. So that's going to delete the history. So you can see that history that we had over here and those options, they go away. So it's kind of like you're taking that object and you're just freezing it in whatever that state is for it. Now you can do more operations to it, and you can just delete the history a little bit later. So the next thing I'm going to show you is about this scale information and the translation information. So what we can do is what's called freezing this. So we can go to modify, and we'll do freeze transformations. Let's do the option box for this so we can take a look at what we can freeze. We can freeze just translation, rotation or scale, or we can have them all checked and we can freeze everything all at the same time. So we'll hit apply and we can just freeze this out. So then now you can see it zeroes out the translation, it zeroes out the scale. So if anything were to happen to this, so if I was able to scale this thing up, kind of mess this up, and I move this out of the location, I can zero this out for translation and I can put everything back to a scale of 1, and then we can get it back to its original position as we've frozen it. So this could allow you to freeze something and then kind of try out some different options and kind of change scale and maybe proportions and stuff like that. So that's some kind of option for you at least, right? So that's us taking something and manipulating it at the object level. Or the next section, we'll actually take a look at taking polygon primitive, and then we'll be using faces and we'll manipulate things at a face level. So let's go ahead and take a look at being able to use faces now. So we're going to take this piece that we've actually made and we're going to duplicate it. So if you want to duplicate something, select it. You can go to edit and duplicate. If you notice the hotkey for that, it's Control D. So I'm just going to take that and I'm going to move it up into space here. And if you see, if we move it up, we can get really close. And it looks like if we do a value of 10.5, or actually let's try just 10 like this, we've got the right thickness for this thing. Now here's kind of a cool feature. If we want to isolate this and just look at this one piece all by itself, we can go to Show, Isolate Selected, and say View Selected. And it's going to just show us this one piece right here. So if we right click on here and say Edges, I'm just going to double click this edge, and if we hold down Control and hit backspace, we can get rid of it. Normally, I'm going to hit undo real quick, and if I just normally hit backspace for that, it gets rid of it. But if we right click and go to vertices, you can see there's some stray vertices that we got to select and delete. So it's just kind of an easy way to kind of select stuff and get rid of it. So again, I'm going to do F10, or you can right click on here and say Edges. I'll double click this and hit Control backspace just to delete it. Okay, so let's get out of Isolate Select here again. So Show, Isolate Select, View Selected. And then what we're going to take a look at is using faces. So if we right click on here and we say face, we can manipulate things by just grabbing this part here and then pulling that in within here like that. So I do know if I hold down V, I can temporarily turn on vert snapping and snap to vertices on here. But because this is in template mode, it's not going to let us see that. Now if it's in reference mode, if you hold down V, you can see I can snap to verts that way. So I'm just going to pull this out for just a second so we can kind of take a look at some other options for things. So I put that back in template mode. Now if I want to snap to the grid, and I can turn on the grid on and off here like this, I can temporarily turn on grid snapping by holding down X. So you can see here was snap to grid, we had snap to points. If we hold down X, we can drag this and then snap to the grid like this, right through here. Now if we wanted to manipulate this on a face level here, you can see we can take this face and we can move it back and forth. So moving faces is basically like moving all these 4 edges here, or moving 1, 2, 3, 4 vertices all at the same time. You can see with this face back here, actually I want to hold down X and turn on snap to grid, and then I'm just going to move that into position here like this for this beam, and that will give us the first start of our beam here. If I open up Canon and what we've got on the left side, I'm taking a look at what we called these different cubes. So I didn't name them anything special here. What I could do is just call this rail like this, and then do it _001, something like that. And that will give us the start of our first rail. Now if you remember from before, I'm going to turn off the grid. What we've got here is some translation, and I want to zero that out. Let's just get used to this stuff. Let's just do modify freeze transformations, and that will add some history. And if you remember how to delete history, the hotkey for that is Alt-Shift-D, but we can go to Edit and Delete by Type and History, and that will get rid of all the different options that we've got on here for this one. So the next part, we're going to take a look at using and manipulating edges and start manipulating things that way. So let's go ahead and duplicate this rail. If you remember, the hotkey for that is Control D, or we can go to Edit and Duplicate. So we're going to duplicate this up, move it up. I'm going to hold down X while I'm moving right in here. So hold down X and move that up and you can see it's going to be a unit of 10 for that. And so for this one, we're going to be using edges. So let's just right click on here and say edge, or you can hit F10. Either one will work just fine. So you can see we can manipulate things by just taking this edge and then put it on the move tool. And we can hold down X and we could snap to the grid here. So we take that and we take this edge and we can move it within here. So I can do that. I can manipulate this way. I hold down X and then just move this whole thing here. So you can see we can like really kind of tweak out the shape quite a bit by manipulating edges. Now if you put scale for your edges, you could do stuff like this and kind of scale it out. So I'm just going to take this edge, move it. I'm going to hold down X, snap to the grid like this, and then I'm going to hit F8 because we can cycle back and forth between object mode and these component modes that we've got. So I want to delete the history on this. I'm going to do Alt Shift D for that, and we've got no history on that. Now we do have some translation, so we can go to Modify, Freeze Transformations, and it's going to use the options that we set before. Okay, so now this automatically named it rail underscore 002 because we duplicated the first one. It's not going to give it the same name, so it gave it a new name and just added the digit 2 to it. So there's our second rail. So that's how we manipulate using edges. Let's go ahead and look at how we can manipulate using vertices. So I'm going to hit Control D again, or go to Edit and duplicate just like that. And let's just go ahead and put this on the move tool. I'm going to tap W for that. And then as we drag up, we'll hold down X and then drag up again like this, and we're going to snap another 10 grid increments like that. This time we'll right click and say Vertex, or you can hit F9, either one. And you can see we can move each one of these verts individually now. So we can move it back and forth like this. If I hold down X, I can drag it along this here. If I select this one, hold down X, drag it here. Now it's possible to select multiple things all at one time. You can hold down X and then drag it here. I'm going to move it back real quick and just show you this option. If we select everything and hold down X, we should be able to snap to the grid and move it along. And the reason why it's kind of moving everything together as a group is this option here. If we double click on the move setting tools and we go to move and snap settings and we go to this retain component spacing, it'll keep the spacing that we kind of have here for this. Let me show you what happens when we turn that off. I like this to be off as a default option because I always want to snap to the grid and make everything kind of line up. Now if we hold down X and then move along here, and you can see it just kind of flattens everything out because it's taking everything and it's conforming it to the grid. But again, if you want to keep this kind of spacing that you have here, this shape, turn on retain component spacing, then you can hold down X. You're still snapping to the grid at that point. You're just holding a shape. So I'm going to turn that off. This is what I like for the default. Let's kind of move it right within here. And so we've only got one more railing to kind of build. Let's just go ahead and hit F8 right here to go into object mode, duplicate it, Control D, or go to Edit, duplicate, just like that. And then we're going to move it up actually 10 units like this. And if you see what we've got going on here for this one, we've got this rounding going on. So I'm going to use the face mode. I'm going to go to face, select this, hold down W for move, hold down X to snap, and we've got a block that's about the right size here for this thing. So the next thing I'm going to do is just round this corner. I'm going to right click in here and select edges, and if we shift right click, we're going to get to this option for bevel edge. So if we do that, it's going to give us these options that you see here. If we click and drag on the word segment, we can add more segments to it. If we change this fraction, we can actually change the angle that we've got here and then keep adding these different segments. So if I do 1, let's just do 0.9. I think that's the option that I actually set for that. So it's not, doesn't have to be perfect or anything. And I put these segments to 4, and I think this gives us some nice kind of rounding that we have here. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is go back to object mode, hit F8 like this. Let's delete the history, Alt Shift D, and we've got some translation on here. We're going to go modify, freeze transformations, just like that. We got some on here, and if we tap G for our last command, it'll repeat the last command that we had. So we just froze transformations without having to go up to the top menu like that. Now with these selected here. I'm going to select this one, hold down Shift, and I can keep adding this as a selection. I can hit Control G, and I can call this side underscore L, like that, just like what we've got going up here for the other option, example, sorry. So I can take the slide left, I can duplicate it. Remember, duplication is edit and duplicate, like that. And now we can change this underscore L to underscore R, and then we can give this a negative scale in X, like this. And the reason that's happening is if you take a look at the group and you look at the pivot point for it, it's set at the center of the origin of the world. So as we give it a negative scale, it's over here, and if we give it a negative scale this direction, it scales across that axis and gives us a mirrored copy of it. So that's getting us all set up for everything that we need for the base part of the cannon. Next, we'll start working on some things using cylinders and maybe making things like the axles and the wheels for things.